great pleasure to introduce Regis Tutu, who has a long history of social justice activism. Regis served as the Africa coordinator to the World Social Forum. He is a founding director of Plenary and Men's Forum in Zimbabwe, worked as the International Solidarity Coordinator for the Treatment Action Campaign, and is now Sonke's National Program Manager, and serves as the Africa Region Coordinator for MenEngage. And Reg is going to tell us a little bit about what is currently happening with MenEngage in the region. So please put your hands together for both Gary and Reg.
Focus a lot more on what could happen after the symposium. I think Gary has done a very good job of actually telling us where we are coming from. I'll also ask my colleague, Jumisani Ribombo, who was, for the past 3 or 4 years, the MenEngage coordinator for Africa, to actually give us a lot more information around what is happening. What I want to do is to take a few minutes time, as I said, to actually focus on what we think should be happening. This is necessarily not being prescriptive, but to actually say to you, as we have this conversation over the next 5 days, as we hear the wonderful work that is happening across the continent, as we share the skills in the skills building sessions, what is it that we can now begin to think to say after the seminar, this is what we can do. We have brought different people from across the continent, particularly from civil society, the MenEngage network, but as you heard from Dean, reaching out to the Commonwealth civil society networks, but also, as how Desai said this morning, he says this is the biggest mixture of men and women that is talking, or that is looking at how we can work collaboratively together. So the question is, how do we continue to do so? How do we go to East Africa, to West Africa, and engage in processes that will all have the same mixture of men and women, the same mixture of funding partners, and the same mixture of policymakers? What will that kind of work look like at regional level, at country level, when we actually say what Gary was talking about? How do we begin to actually engage each other and engage the policymakers to actually begin to make a difference? We've already heard from Gary that we do have very fantastic policies, we do have very good protocols on the books, but how do we make those protocols, those policies meaningful to me as a man, meaningful to our brothers and sisters, to our nephews, etc., as Kumi was saying? How do we actually begin to shape those policies to actually say, when we are doing work, they actually lead to transformation in the lives of both men and women? And so I would like to take a few moments to actually look at that. And I think essentially we would want maybe to turn that into 3 things. To actually say, how do we equip civil society networks as well as policymakers at both national and regional level to actually work together? But not only at national level, but to actually begin to say those spaces that governments occupy, the SADC, ECOWAS, the East African Community, the African Union, the Pan-African Parliamentary, and the SADC Parliamentary Forum, how do we actually begin to go out to them and say, you have passed these laws, you have these policies, but they are sitting on the shelves, and we actually begin to engage you. We hope the presentations, the research that will be shared with us, and the skills building will actually equip us then to actually begin to go to these bodies and actually say to them, we need to meet, we need to sit, and actually say how do we turn these policies into action. Part of the difficulty has been that as civil society, do we actually have the capacity to engage policymakers and our governments? How do we get to a point where ordinary members of parliament, mostly who are men, begin to actually pass not only the appropriate legislation, but they go back to their constituency, they go back to the men and women in the community, and actually ensure that the law that they are passing is relevant, is appropriate, and is actually transformative and does away with the gender imbalances. Gary talked about reaching out to education ministries, to the health ministries, to the police, safety, security, and the military. How do we actually get this work in those spaces, within those ministries, to actually say we need to be engaging and seeing that the curriculum actually begins to reflect the gender, the need for gender equality? How do we actually engage the teachers? How do we actually engage the ministries in actually telling out those policies that then lead to this transformative work? How do we begin to engage the health ministries so that when Gary talks about men coming through that door, to actually be very practical and concrete around what that work looks like? How do we go to the local district clinic? How do we go to the local hospital, the central hospital, and actually make it much more open to men? How do we get the health personnel to actually begin to appreciate that when men come along to these centers when they are women, they are actually part of the process of engaging them, and they're actually taking part in ensuring that they are not only taking care of their health needs, but those of the women and girls that they care for. Finally, the third thing that we need to look at, the whole question of operation. Hasai talked of competition. How do we begin to do this work, not only as civil society networks, but also begin to position the work that we're doing as organizations that are focusing largely on men and boys, actually begin to collaborate very much so with women's organizations, so that we move away from framing this work as either or we actually frame this work as collaborative, as supporting each other, and actually acknowledging what Gary was talking about, that this work essentially comes out of the work that the women's rights movement have been doing over the years. So in terms of then actually what, in concrete terms of what this would mean, as Dean said, we are actually going to have a lot more where we are going to go into country groups and also into regional groups. We would really want to come out of that very clear national and regional plan of actions, to actually hear from out of the 5 days that we're going to meet here, to actually hear plans that will talk to, for example, saying that we are going to meet with our parliamentarians, we are going to meet with our regional economic councils, we are actually going to look at 1 or 2 or 3 policies and actually begin to say this will mean that when we do this work, it will actually scale up. Anisha also talked about the upcoming Common Heads of Government meeting, the Women's Affairs meeting in Barbados next year. How do we actually have the capacity arising out of this meeting to be able to move into those spaces, feel very comfortable, and actually challenge the policymakers around either the failure to implement the policies that are already existing, or to begin to look creatively at how we can bring not only more men on board, but actually bring about transformation. We all heard this morning around the UN Secretary General's campaign to end violence against women. And for us in Africa, the Africa-wide campaign, what would that look like? How do we take the discourse, the discussion we're having in this, into that campaign, so that in each and every country, at national level, around the regional networks, this campaign really makes a difference. We really need to then critically debate and actually say, how are the discussions that we're going to have over the next 5 days don't turn up to just another symposium, another meeting. Finally, we hope to come up with a call to action. That call to action, for me, we need to debate around after the symposium. How do we actually make that call to action a living document to make it much more meaningful, and so that this call to action is something that can be easily be implemented across Africa. So as I end, my challenge, my appeal is that as we meet across the various structures